Welcome back to the Outcome Centric Selling Academy, to our course on establishing the foundations. And in this module, we're going to compare and contrast a sales process mindset to adopting a buying decision journey mindset. Quick reminder of our previous module. When we tried to define what we meant by outcomes, we concluded that they're changes that follow as a result or a consequence of an action or situation. They can be organizational or personal. They can be positive or negative. We concluded that it's our customers' belief in the likely outcomes of any decision that actually influences the decision they make. And there's some behavioral implications, because I think and hope that when you take an outcome-centric mindset, you'll end up thinking more about what your customers want to achieve and less about what you actually want to sell them. They'll cause you to focus on the ends that need to be achieved and not just the tasks that need to be completed. They'll cause you to focus on the quality of the result and not just the quantity of activity. And of course, to acknowledge that achieving our customers' ultimate desired outcomes usually involves a series of advances. So let's start by thinking about what I'd characterize as a traditional sales process mindset, a mindset that looks at the world from an order-focused perspective. And that order-focused perspective typically labels sales stages using terms like discovering or qualifying or prospecting or proposing or closing. And you may recognize similar terms in your own current environment. In fact, some sales methodologies have gone so far as to suggest that this is a bit like advancing forwards through a submarine and slamming the watertight doors behind you with no scope or hope for ever revisiting any of the previous stages. You could only go forward in this mindset. So I want you to pause for a moment and think, so what might be wrong with this traditional picture? And I'll volunteer three things. Firstly, those stage definitions are based on our sales actions and have very little to do with customer behavior. They assume that crazy, linear, compartmentalized, one way, no going back process. And yes, the process typically in this mindset is regarded as over once the customer's booked an order with us. Job done. Well, I want you to contrast that with the realities of your customers' actual buying decision journeys. And I'm sharing a graph, a chart here that was created by Gartner that reflected their research into what really happened or happens when customers try and make buying decisions. And people have talked about this as being like life in the spaghetti bowl. It's non-linear, it's complicated, it's messy. It is really about the phases the customer goes through, exploring, defining, selecting, verifying, and confirming, rather than our artificially labeled sales stages. It recognizes the potential, the likelihood even, that this buying journey could go backwards, forwards, around in circles, or be abandoned at any point during any phase. And of course, if you really try and understand the true scope of the customer's decision journey, you start to realize it actually starts long before anything that we might label as a sales process begins. But equally important, it goes on long after we book their purchase order. And in fact, it doesn't end until their ultimate organizational and personal outcomes have been achieved. Otherwise, the journey is a failure. Even if they've ordered something, if they don't achieve their desired outcomes, the journey is a failure. So this has got some pretty serious implications. We can't afford to ignore it. We have to help our customer to cope with this complexity, this non-linearity. And you think of some of the uh, aspects of this? Well, firstly, prospects are having to process overwhelming amounts of information. More stakeholders involved in these complex decisions means that the decision making is even more complicated. And without widespread internal consensus across the decision making group, which very often runs into double figures nowadays, a decision to change is unlikely. And it's no wonder then, is it, that an increasing number of buying decision journeys are being abandoned without any action. And there's yet another complication. And that's because when our customer embarks on this buying journey, it's very often because of what is known as the fear of missing out, FOMO. And that's very often a powerful early phase driver. I'd summarize it as them thinking, bad things could happen if we stay on our current path. And that very often triggers or initiates a buying decision journey. But something happens as they approach the point of commitment, as they realize they're actually going to have to either decide or abandon or delay. And that fear of missing out is transformed very often into a fear of messing up, FOMO. And that's very often a very powerful late stage inhibitor. And you might characterize this mindset as being, bad things could happen if we make the wrong decision. So these are very significant changes. And I want to recommend to you that it's time to throw out the old and bring in the new, to abandon traditional linear sales thinking and to accept the inevitability of our customers' complex buying decision process, and in doing that, to embrace a new role. And that role is to help our customer make sense of their complex, their non-linear, and their often confusing buying decision journeys. So I think you've got a number of very important new roles. Firstly, you need to help your customer to make sense of what is an increasingly complex and confusing world. Secondly, you need to educate them on the outcomes that they could and should aspire to, which might go beyond those that they're currently aware of. You need to guide and facilitate their buying decision journey to help eliminate some of the obstacles that might be standing in their path. And of course, you need to ensure, you and your colleagues, that even after the order's been taken, that you continue to focus on making sure that their desired outcomes are actually achieved. Because as we've said, their journey isn't over, isn't regarded as a success until the desired outcome or outcomes have been achieved. So let me summarize this module. We need to turn our attention from driving a linear traditional sales process to understanding and facilitating our customers' buying decision journeys. Because those traditional sales processes and the thinking that lie behind them often dramatically oversimplify or ignore how our prospective customers actually make their buying decisions. So it's no wonder they get derailed so often. And our customers' actual buying decision journeys. And this is particularly true for discretionary purchases or unfamiliar buying journeys, are typically complex and non-linear. And unless their decision to buy is inevitable, unless their buying process is familiar, i.e., unless it's a pretty transactional purchase, their journey usually looks much more like a scrambled up spaghetti bowl than a straightforward sequence of completely predictable linear steps. And yes, at any time and from any point, that buying decision journey could move forwards, it could move backwards, it could go around in circles, or it could be abandoned altogether. And we've also seen that our potential customers are often torn and conflicted between their fear of missing out, and their fear of messing up, FOMO and FOMO. So, your new role as a salesperson, as a sense maker, as an outcome shaper requires that you educate your customers on the outcomes they could and should aspire to, that you guide and facilitate their buying decision journey, that you help to eliminate the obstacles that might stand in their way. And yes, you and your colleagues need to ensure that your customers' desired outcomes are actually achieved and delivered in practice and seen to be so. So, we've come to the end of this module. And again, I want to encourage you to pause and reflect. I want to ask you, how has the thinking in this module helped you to think differently? And how are you going to change the way you're thinking about the difference between your current sales process and your prospect's actual buying decision process in response to these ideas and concepts? And yes, even more important, I want to challenge you and ask you, so what are you now going to do differently as a result? What are you now determined that you need to start doing? What do you now realize that you need to stop doing? And how are you going to make what you were already doing even more effective as a result of some of these ideas? And yes, I want to ask you to pause, to reflect, and to write your commitments to yourself down, because that's the best way of making sure you actually put them into practice. So there we are, contrasting the traditional sales process perspective with a perspective that realizes our role in facilitating our customers' buying decision journey. I hope you found these ideas relevant to your current and future sales environment, and that you'll want to put them into practice in managing your current and future sales opportunities. And I wish you the very best of success in applying this mindset. Now, I also hope that you're looking forward to joining me online for our next module, where I'm going to explore in more detail how complex buying decisions are actually made. And I hope you'll want to join me for that in the very near future.